The message came through Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station at exactly 3:47 a.m. Universal Time. At first, the night shift operators thought it was just another burst of cosmic radiation. But something about this signal was different. It pulsed with a pattern too regular to be natural, too desperate to ignore. Tom, the lead operator, leaned forward in his chair, his coffee forgotten as he adjusted the frequency. The static cleared, revealing a voice that seemed to sing rather than speak. The translator AI took a moment to process before converting the alien words into English. "Help us, please. Anyone. The swarm comes. They take our children. Our home burns. If anyone hears this, please." The message repeated, each cycle growing weaker. Tom's hands moved quickly across his console, tracing the signal to its source. The coordinates placed it in the Orion Arm, about 300 light-years from Earth, a region they had only recently gained the ability to reach, thanks to their new jump drive technology. Within minutes, the Emergency Response Center had notified Earth's Military Council. 12 grim-faced men and women gathered in the steel-gray conference room of the Earth Defense Force headquarters in Geneva. The holographic display in the center of the table showed the distress signal's origin point pulsing in angry red. "We can't ignore this," said Captain James of the EDF Thunderchild. He stood at the head of the table, his weathered face illuminated by the hologram's glow. "We've spent the last 50 years preparing to join the galactic community. Now we have a chance to prove humanity's worth." Admiral Wilson shook her head. "It's not that simple, James. We're still considered a Deathworlder species by most of the galaxy. Our very presence might cause more panic than help. Remember the Proxima incident?" The room fell silent. 3 years ago, humanity's first contact with an alien species had ended in disaster when their diplomatic vessel's gravity systems had accidentally activated at Earth normal levels, causing severe injuries to the alien delegation. Since then, most species kept their distance from the dangerous humans. "That's exactly why we should go," James argued. "These people are desperate enough to send an open distress call. They need help that only Deathworlders can provide. Our ships are the toughest in known space. Our crews can handle combat maneuvers that would kill most species. We're built for this." The council members exchanged looks. They all knew humanity's unique position in the galaxy. Evolved on a high-gravity world with extreme weather patterns and dangerous predators, humans were naturally stronger, faster, and more durable than most spacefaring species. What they saw as normal living conditions would be deadly to 90% of known alien life. "The swarm," General Martinez mused, studying the data scrolling across his tablet. "We've intercepted reports about them. They operate like insects, a hive mind. They strip planets bare of resources, including living beings. No one's successfully fought them off yet." "No one like us has tried," James countered. He pulled up footage from the Thunderchild's recent training exercises. The massive warship performed maneuvers that seemed to defy physics, its reinforced hull designed to withstand forces that would tear most ships apart. "We've spent generations turning our Deathworld disadvantages into strengths. Maybe it's time to use them for something more than scaring our neighbors." The council chamber grew quiet as the members considered the implications. Humanity had worked hard to overcome their fearsome reputation, to prove they could be gentle despite their strength. But sometimes strength was needed. Admiral Wilson finally broke the silence. "How soon can your battle group be ready, Captain?" James straightened, a slight smile crossing his face. "The Thunderchild can jump in 2 hours. The Dauntless and Warrior can follow within 4. 3 ships should be enough for an initial response, while keeping our home defenses strong." 3 ships against the swarm. Martins raised an eyebrow. "That's cutting it close." 3 human ships, James corrected. 3 ships crewed by people who grew up playing in 3 times the gravity most species consider normal. 3 ships built to survive conditions that would destroy most fleets. He looked around the room, meeting each council member's eyes. Sometimes a small hammer strikes harder than a large one, if it's made of the right material. The council voted. In the end, it wasn't even close. Within hours, humanity would announce its presence to the galaxy not through careful diplomacy or trade agreements, but by answering a cry for help. As James strode toward his ship, he hoped they were ready for what would come next. But then again, humans were always at their best when facing impossible odds. After all, they'd evolved on a planet that had tried to kill them every day, and they'd turned it into home. How much worse could space be? The jump through space left the human fleet's crews with their usual headaches. But they were used to it. Captain James stood on the Thunderchild's bridge, watching as the strange stars of the Meadowfolk system came into view. What he saw made his jaw tighten. Debris filled the space around the third planet. Broken ships and pieces of orbital stations drifted like autumn leaves in a bitter wind. The planet itself showed dark scars where the swarm had struck population centers. Life signs? James asked, his voice steady despite the destruction before them. Multiple readings from the southern continent, replied Susan at the sensor station. They're gathered in underground shelters. Several thousand survivors, at least. She paused, adjusting her instruments. Sir, their vital signs are different. Their hearts beat much slower than ours, and their body temperature is lower. Low-gravity species. James nodded. Remember your training. When we meet them, move slowly and carefully. The Thunderchild's communications officer, Mike, suddenly straightened in his chair. Sir, incoming transmission. They're using an old galactic standard frequency. A hologram flickered to life in the center of the bridge. The alien that appeared looked almost like a tall, graceful deer standing on two legs. Its fur shimmered with pale blue patterns, and its large eyes showed both fear and hope. Unknown vessels. The alien's translator spoke in slightly delayed English. We thank you for answering our call. But the creature hesitated. Your ship's design is unfamiliar. What species are you? James stepped forward. I am Captain James of the Earth Defense Force ship Thunderchild. We're human, and we're here to help. The alien's reaction was immediate. It stepped back, those large eyes widening further. Humans? Deathworlders. The translator couldn't quite capture the mix of terror and awe in its voice. We did not expect. We received your distress call, James said gently, keeping his voice calm and his movements slow. We came to help. Nothing more. The alien, who introduced itself as first speaker Bell of the Meadowfolk, seemed to gather its courage. The swarm attacked without warning. They want our world's resources, our people. We cannot fight them. We are not. We are not built for violence. That's why we're here, James replied. My ships can provide protection while we evacuate your people to safer locations. We've already contacted nearby systems friendly to Earth. The first speaker's translator was silent for a long moment as the alien studied the humans on the bridge. James knew what Bell saw. Creatures that looked soft compared to many species, but whose muscles were dense with power, whose bones were thick with calcium, whose reflexes were honed by evolving alongside predators. Your gravity, Bell finally said. Our world. You will find it very light. James smiled. We've compensated for that. Our suits can simulate Earth gravity for us. We've trained for this. Before Bell could respond, alarms blared across the bridge. Susan's hands flew across her console. Multiple jump signatures. Swarm ships entering the system. The first speaker's image flickered in panic. They're back. The main fleet. They're coming to finish what they started. Get to your shelters, James ordered, his voice firm, but reassuring. We'll handle this. He turned to his crew as the alien's image vanished. Battle stations. All hands prepare for combat. Show them what Deathworlders can do. The swarm ships emerged from their jump points. Twisted, organic-looking vessels that moved with unsettling coordination. There were dozens of them, each larger than the Thunderchild. Their weapons began to power up. But James smiled. On a world with 3 times the gravity of most inhabited planets, humans had learned to be quick despite their weight. In space, that strength translated into ships that could pull maneuvers other species couldn't survive and crews who could endure forces that would kill most aliens. "Weapons free," he commanded. "Let's show them why you don't threaten the helpless when there are humans around." The Thunderchild's engines roared to life, pushing the ship into a turn that would have crushed most alien crews. Behind them, the Dauntless and Warrior moved into formation, their own weapons charging. The swarm was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones who chose to be protectors. The swarm struck first, their ships moving in perfect formation like a school of deadly fish. Energy beams lanced out toward the human vessels, but the Thunderchild was already moving. The massive ship rolled in a way that should have been impossible for something its size, the attack passing harmlessly through empty space. "Their weapons are strong," Susan called from her station, "but slow. Our reaction time is almost twice as fast as theirs." Captain James nodded, remembering his training. Humans had evolved to dodge predators, to track moving prey, to think and react in split seconds. What had once helped them survive on Earth was now keeping them alive among the stars. "Warrior, take the left flank," he ordered. "Dauntless, right flank. Let's show them what these Deathworlder ships can do." The human ships broke formation, each moving in its own unpredictable pattern. The swarm ships tried to follow, but their perfect coordination became a weakness. They couldn't adapt quickly enough to 3 targets moving in different ways. Inside the Thunderchild, warning lights flashed as the ship pulled another hard turn. The crew felt the strain despite their gravity chairs, but their bodies, built to handle Earth's crushing gravity, took the pressure. On their screens, they watched swarm crew members being knocked unconscious by the same maneuvers. "Their ships are linked," Mike reported from communications. "I'm picking up constant signals between them. They think as one, move as one, and fall as one," James finished. "Target their command ship. All weapons, full spread." The Thunderchild's guns roared to life. Rails of magnetic energy threw chunks of metal at speeds that would tear through most shields. The swarm command ship's barriers held for 3 seconds before failing. That was 2 seconds longer than most shields lasted against human weapons, but not long enough. The explosion lit up space like a new sun. The effect on the other swarm ships was immediate. Their perfect formation wavered, their movements becoming jerky and uncertain. "They're not used to thinking alone," Susan realized. "Each ship is waiting for orders that aren't coming." But the swarm wasn't finished. What they lacked in individual initiative, they made up for in numbers. Dozens of ships turned their weapons on the Warrior, trying to overwhelm it with sheer firepower. "Warrior's taking heavy damage," Mike shouted. "Their port shields are failing." James pressed a button on his chair. "Warrior, fall back. We'll cover you." He turned to his weapons officer. "Target their front line. Show them what happens when you corner a Deathworlder." The Thunderchild's main gun had been built using technology that made other species nervous. It fired a beam of energy so intense it could cut through battle steel like paper. The human ships could handle the recoil that would tear apart weaker vessels. The beam sliced through 3 swarm ships before they could react. The Dauntless added its own fire, catching the alien fleet in a deadly crossfire. Without their central command, the swarm ships couldn't coordinate a defense. But more swarm ships were jumping into the system. The humans were now outnumbered 20-1, and the Warrior was hurt. "Message from the planet," Mike called out. "The Meadowfolk. They're offering us their orbital defense platforms. They say they've never used the weapons, but—" "Send them our targeting protocols," James ordered. He allowed himself a small smile. "Let's see how the swarm handles a real fight." Ancient defense platforms around the planet hummed to life, their weapons guided by human tactical systems and powered by Meadowfolk technology. The swarm found themselves caught between hammer and anvil, human ships above, planetary defenses below. Multiple swarm ships breaking formation, Susan reported, excitement in her voice. They're running. But James knew better than to celebrate too early. The remaining swarm ships were regrouping, probably receiving orders from another command ship. This was just the first round. All ships, form up, he commanded. Warrior, status report on those repairs. This isn't over yet, but we've shown them something important. He watched as the swarm fleet pulled back, preparing for another attack. We've shown them that sometimes the most dangerous beings in the galaxy are the ones who choose to protect others. The battle for the Meadowfolk system was far from over, but humanity had made its point. The Deathworlders hadn't come to conquer or destroy. They had come to defend. And they were very, very good at it. The captured swarm drone floated in the Thunderchild's containment field, its organic metal shell gleaming under the bright lights. Captain James stood with first speaker bell, studying the twisted piece of technology they'd recovered from the battle. It's still trying to send signals, Susan said, checking her readings. Even damage, it wants to connect to the hive. Bell's large eyes reflected the drone's strange surface. We never understood how they think. They act as one, yet each ship holds hundreds. James walked around the containment field, his movements careful in the low gravity of the lab. The artificial Earth gravity generators were turned off here to allow the Meadowfolk scientists to work alongside the humans. Mike, he called to his communications officer. Show them what we found. Mike nodded and brought up a hologram showing waves of energy patterns. The swarm ships don't just communicate, they share a single consciousness. When we destroyed their command ship, we didn't just kill their leader. We cut off part of their mind. The Meadowfolk scientists moved closer, their graceful forms making the humans look rough and solid in comparison. But James had learned that looking delicate didn't mean being weak. The Meadowfolk had survived the first swarm attack through clever hiding and brilliant shield technology. Look here, Susan pointed to a particular pattern. Their shared mind makes them powerful, but it's also a weakness. They can't think individually. They don't know how. Like a body without a brain, one of the Meadowfolk scientists said through the translator. But they have many brains now. They adapted. James smiled. If there was one thing humans understood, it was adaptation. They adapted, but not fast enough. Their new command structure is weaker. They're trying to rebuild their network, but it's like trying to think with only half your mind working. The drone suddenly pulsed with light, making everyone step back. The containment field held, but the drone's surface had changed color. They're calling it, Mike said, checking his instruments. The hive is trying to reconnect. Can we track the signal? James asked. Susan's fingers flew over her console. Better than that. We can see how it works now. The drone is like a cell in a body. It knows what to do, but it needs the hive mind to tell it when and how. Without those instructions, it's just a machine. Bell finished, understanding dawning in those alien eyes. But your ships, your crews, each one thinks for itself. James nodded. Humans evolved to be independent thinkers. We work together not because we have to, but because we choose to. Each crew member can make their own decisions if they need to. That's why you beat them, another Meadowfolk scientist said. You think faster because you don't wait for orders from outside. The drone pulsed again, more weakly this time. Its signal was fading, but they had learned what they needed to know. Their next attack will be bigger, James said. They'll try to overwhelm us with numbers. But now we know their weakness. He turned to Bell. We'll need your help. Your people understand frequencies and energy patterns better than we do. Together, we might be able to disrupt their entire network. Bell's fur rippled with patterns of blue light, a Meadowfolk sign of agreement. We survived underground for generations. We know how to block signals, how to redirect energy. But we never thought to use this knowledge as a weapon. Sometimes the best defense is understanding your enemy, James replied. Humans learned that the hard way, fighting each other before we reached the stars. Now we can use that knowledge to help others. The ship's alert system suddenly chimed. Multiple jump signatures detected at the edge of the system. Susan reported. The swarm is gathering a larger fleet. James looked at the drone one last time. How long until we can have a disruption system ready? 6 hours, Bell answered. Maybe 5 with both our teams working together. They'll attack in 4, James said. He turned to his crew. Then we'll just have to hold them off until the trap is ready. Show me what we've got. As the humans and meadowfolk began their preparations, James thought about how far they'd come. 2 species that should have been too different to work together, joining forces against a common enemy. Perhaps that was humanity's greatest strength, not their powerful bodies or quick minds, but their ability to turn strangers into allies. They would need every ally they could get for what was coming next. The swarm arrived exactly as predicted, their ships darkening the stars like a cloud of angry insects. The Thunderchild's sensors counted over 300 vessels, 10 times what they'd faced in the first battle. They really don't like losing, Mike said from his station, trying to keep his voice light despite the odds. Captain James stood at the center of his bridge, watching the enemy fleet approach. The Warrior had been repaired as much as possible in the short time they had, its crew ready despite their earlier damage. The Dauntless held position near the planet, protecting the Meadowfolk's orbital platforms. Status of the disruption system, James asked. 80% complete, Susan replied. First Speaker Bell's team needs 15 more minutes. James watched the swarm fleet split into attack formations. We need to give them that time. All ships, battle positions, remember your training. We're stronger than they think. The swarm attacked with overwhelming force. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled space, turning the darkness into blinding light. But the human ships were ready. The Thunderchild rolled and twisted, its engines pushing it through maneuvers that would have torn apart weaker ships. Inside, the crew's bodies, evolved under Earth's heavy gravity, handled forces that would have killed most alien species. Their pattern is different, Susan called out, her hands dancing across her controls. They're not moving as one unit anymore. They've split into smaller groups. James smiled grimly. They're learning. But so are we. He opened a channel to all ships. Execute Plan Thunder. Show them what Deathworlders can really do. The 3 human ships suddenly broke formation, each flying directly at a different section of the swarm fleet. It looked like suicide. Until the Thunderchild's main gun fired. The beam of concentrated energy didn't aim for the swarm ships. Instead, it hit a piece of debris from the earlier battle, superheating it instantly. The metal exploded into a cloud of superheated plasma, catching a dozen swarm ships in the blast. Direct hit. The weapons officer shouted. Their outer shields are down. The Warrior and Dauntless followed suit, their own weapons creating more explosive traps among the debris field. The swarm ships tried to dodge, but there were too many of them packed too closely together. Their own numbers became a weakness. But the swarm commanders had learned from their earlier defeat. A group of their largest ships formed a wall, their combined shields creating an impenetrable barrier. Behind this wall, more ships gathered, preparing for a final push toward the planet. They're going to try to overwhelm us, Mike warned. Too many to dodge. James hit his communications button. Bell, we need that disruption system now. Almost ready. The first speaker's voice came back, steady despite the chaos. The frequency modulators are aligned. But we need them closer. James looked at his tactical display. The swarm wall was advancing, pushing the human ships back toward the planet. Behind them, the Meadowfolk orbital platforms waited, their weapons ready, but not yet firing. All ships, fall back, James ordered. Make them think they've got us. The human vessels retreated, taking hits on their shields but staying just out of reach of the swarm's heaviest weapons. The massive alien fleet followed, their wall of ships moving steadily forward. They're entering optimal range, Susan reported, but our shields can't take much more. A warning light flashed on James's chair. The warrior's engines were starting to overheat from the constant high-G maneuvers. The Dauntless reported microfractures in its hull. Even the mighty Thunderchild was showing strain. But then Bell's voice came over the command channel. "The disruption system is ready. Get clear." James allowed himself a fierce grin. "All ships, emergency jump back on my mark." He waited until the swarm fleet had fully committed to their charge, until they were perfectly positioned above the Meadowfolk orbital platforms. Now, the human ships vanished in 3 flashes of jump drive energy, leaving the swarm fleet alone above the planet. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every orbital platform around the Meadowfolk world lit up at once. But they weren't firing weapons. They were broadcasting the disruption signal, amplified by the Meadowfolk's mastery of energy patterns and frequencies. The real battle was about to begin. The effect of the disruption signal was instant and devastating. Swarm ships that had moved with perfect coordination suddenly jerked like puppets with cut strings. The massive fleet's formation broke apart as each vessel lost its connection to the hive mind. "It's working." Susan's voice was filled with excitement as she watched her sensors. "Their command network is completely scrambled." The human ships jumped back into normal space behind the confused swarm fleet. Captain James watched as the enemy vessels tried to reorganize, but without their shared consciousness, they couldn't coordinate their movements. "Look at them," Mike said softly. "They don't know how to think alone." James opened a channel to all ships. "This is their weakness. Hit them while they're confused. Show them what free-thinking warriors can do." The Thunderchild's engines roared as it charged into the scattered swarm fleet. Ships that had once moved with deadly grace now bumped into each other, trying to avoid the human vessel's attack. Their weapons fired randomly, sometimes hitting their own ships. "Message from the warrior," Mike reported. "They're targeting the bigger ships, breaking them apart." The warrior, despite its earlier damage, dove through the chaos like a shark through a school of fish. Its guns picked off the largest swarm vessels one by one, each shot precise and calculated. Without central coordination, the swarm couldn't organize a defense. The Dauntless added to the confusion, launching waves of small drones that the Meadowfolk had helped modify. Each drone broadcast its own version of the disruption signal, creating zones of electronic chaos wherever they went. "Swarm ships are starting to retreat," Susan called out. "They're trying to get out of range of the disruption field." But James saw something else on his tactical display. A group of swarm ships was moving with purpose toward the planet, fighting through the confusion. They've adapted. Some of them have shut down their network completely. They're running on automatic. "Incoming fire." The warning came too late. The Thunderchild shook as energy beams from the independent swarm ships struck its shields. Warning lights flashed across every console as systems strained under the attack. "Shields at 40%. Susan shouted over the noise of straining metal. "We can't take many more hits like that." James gripped his chair as the ship pulled another high-G turn. "Bell, can you boost the disruption signal?" "Not without burning out the platforms." The first speaker's voice came back. "But we have another idea. Sending new targeting data to your ships." New information flowed across the tactical displays. The Meadowfolk had identified the frequencies the independent swarm ships were using to run their automatic systems. "They may not be connected to the hive," Bell explained, "but they still need basic computer systems to function, and we know frequencies very, very well." James smiled. This was why humans valued allies. Different perspectives, different strengths. All ships switched to the new targeting frequencies. Take out their computer cores. The human fleet adjusted their weapons, firing precisely calibrated energy pulses. The independent swarm ships didn't even try to dodge. Their automatic systems couldn't react fast enough to the new threat. One by one, their lights went dark. "The main fleet is in full retreat," Susan reported. "They're jumping out of the system. 80% of the swarm fleet is gone." The bridge crew began to cheer, but James held up his hand. Status of the remaining ships. Either destroyed or drifting. Mike answered. Without their network or their computers, they're just empty shells. James looked out at the battlefield. The space around the meadowfolk world was filled with drifting swarm vessels, their once threatening forms now powerless and dark. The few that had escaped would carry word back to their hive. This world was protected by Deathworlders. Send rescue teams to any ships with life signs, he ordered. Even swarm crews deserve mercy when they're helpless. He opened a channel to the planet. Bell, your people can come out of hiding now. The swarm won't be back. Because of you, Bell replied. Because humans chose to help those weaker than themselves. James looked at his tired but proud crew. No, because we chose to work together. Your knowledge and our strength. That's what really won this battle. The stars seemed brighter somehow as the human ships began their rescue operations. Today, the galaxy had learned something important. Sometimes the strongest beings were the ones who used their power to protect others. 1 month after the battle, the meadowfolk world looked very different. The orbital debris had been cleared away, replaced by new stations built with both human and meadowfolk technology. Ships from dozens of species now visited the system. Drawn by news of the swarm's defeat, Captain James stood in the planet's new ground-based command center, watching through its crystal walls as meadowfolk children played in the gardens outside. They no longer ran for shelter when ships appeared in the sky. Instead, they waved at the passing vessels, especially the human ones. Hard to believe it's the same place, Mike said, standing beside his captain. The communications officer had lost weight in the planet's low gravity, but like all the human crew, he wore a gravity suit to keep his muscles strong. First Speaker Bell approached them, moving with the natural grace of the meadowfolk. The Galactic Council has sent another message, Bell said, fur patterns showing excitement. They want to know how we defeated the swarm. James smiled. Did you tell them it was your disruption technology that won the battle? I told them the truth, Bell replied. That victory came because two very different species chose to trust each other. Your strength and our knowledge. Your courage and our technology. The room's displays showed views from around the system. Human engineering teams worked alongside meadowfolk scientists, building new defenses. The captured swarm ships were being studied, their secrets unlocked by the combined expertise of both species. We've had 50 requests from other worlds, Mike reported, checking his tablet. Everyone wants human protection now. Funny how quickly they forgot about being scared of Deathworlders. Fear and respect are different things, James said. He watched as a group of human children, visiting from the Thunderchild, played with young meadowfolk in the garden. The humans moved carefully, aware of their greater strength, while the meadowfolk showed them how to make their fur glow with patterns of light. The swarm will think twice before attacking another protected world, Bell said. But more importantly, other species are learning what we learned. That being different doesn't mean we can't work together. A small alarm chimed, and they all looked up at the main display. A new ship was entering the system, but this one was expected. The Earth Defense Force had sent a diplomatic vessel carrying new treaties and trade agreements. The Council wants to reclassify humans, Bell explained. No longer just Deathworlders, but protectors. They're creating a whole new category. James shook his head, amused. Earth's Council will be happy. This is what they wanted. To prove we could be more than what others feared we were. You already proved that, Bell said softly, when you answered our call for help without asking for anything in return. The display showed more images from around the planet. Meadowfolk cities were being rebuilt, stronger than before. The orbital platforms now had both human and meadowfolk crews, their different abilities making them more effective together. Even the captured swarm crews were contributing, sharing what they knew now that they were free of the hive mind. We're receiving reports from the border regions, Mike said. 3 more swarm fleets have changed course, moving away from populated systems. Looks like they don't want to risk meeting more human ships. James nodded, satisfied. Peace through strength, but strength used to protect, not to conquer. And knowledge used to defend, not just to hide. Bell added. The first speaker's fur glowed with patterns that the humans had learned meant deep happiness. My people will never forget what Earth's ships did for us. Outside, the children's game had drawn more spectators. Humans and meadowfolk stood together, watching their young ones play without fear or prejudice. Above them, ships from a dozen worlds moved peacefully through the sky. You know what the best part is? Mike said, looking at the scene. Every ship that lands here, every species that visits, they all learn the same lesson. Being strong doesn't mean you have to be cruel. Being different doesn't mean you have to be enemies. James thought about the battle, about how the human fleet had faced impossible odds to protect strangers. Maybe that's why we evolved on a death world, he said. Not just to be strong, but to understand that strength means nothing if you don't use it to help others. The sun was setting on the meadowfolk world, its light catching the new orbital stations. Each one bore 2 flags now. The flowing patterns of the meadowfolk, and the simple star and circle of Earth's defense force. Different symbols, different species, but united in a common cause. The Deathworlders had answered a cry for help. And in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever.